This is a video that deals with not just one topic, but actually a series of interrelated ideas. I was inspired to make this video by watching the video of another YouTuber, Shanspeare, and the video is called Why the Curtains Are Blue, The Implications of Being Uncritical. So basically she defended the continuing importance of critically analysing literary works rather than reading them simply for enjoyment. I will start by commenting on some of the points that she's made, as well as add some of my own ideas and extend the discussion to some further topics such as the value that literature brings us and the role of humanities education in our society in general. So in Shanspeare's video, firstly, she addresses the critique that analysing a text critically turns reading it from an enjoyment into a chore. Firstly, I think it is a very weak argument, and she does raise this point in her video, and I quote directly, "It's possible to be critical of what you consume and still have fun with what you're doing." I completely agree with her point on this because this is exactly how I approach my reading for leisure. Furthermore, I think critically analysing a text does not necessarily deprive it of any sorts of pleasure in the process, because it does not necessarily mean analysing it in a way dictated by your English teacher or English professor or whatever your curriculum says. Of course, you can just analyse it with a critical lens in your own free time with your own interpretation, or you could read the interpretations of others and take that as kind of like grains of salt and inspiration that you could work off and develop your own understandings. In fact, this is precisely what my channel aims to do, so I provide my own raw interpretations of texts, and I hope that this can help a lot of my viewers interact with these texts more deeply and maybe draw some inspirations about the different lenses through which that they could view the text after watching my video. Another sort of critique is explicitly held against not just critically analysing in general, but over-analysing. What over-analysing is basically you put extra meaning onto the text that the author had not intended, and hence this is what was meant by the meme, "The curtains are blue." And yeah, that's the famous meme here. There are a few points that I wish to say about this. So first, I acknowledge that it is a valid critique. In fact, this was precisely what Susan Sontag has raised in her seminal essay against interpretation. So basically, Sontag's argument is that overanalyzing deprives us of the ability to enjoy a text just as it is, more from a sort of direct feeling-wise instead of critical thinking-wise route. Well, in response to this, I've already said just before that of course there's no problem with just directly enjoying the text through the feeling-wise route, but I think it's a matter of personal choice which way you choose to enjoy the text through. A second problem raised against the problem of overanalyzing is that it distorts author intention. There are basically, in summary, two things I wish to say about this. Firstly, I think construing your own version of author intention is somehow part of the fun of reading, right? In real life, we construe the intentions of people around us, of, I don't even know, like corporations and political agendas, you know, and that's where conspiracy theories come out of. And if this company or that politician does this, you try to reconstruct what they must have intended by that, and etc. So that's a lot of what we do in real life. So no one really thinks it's problematic to do that on a daily basis. Like, even if your boyfriend or girlfriend says something to you, you tend to dig that deeper and just get a lot of things and messages that they might not have intended. And that creates fights, yeah, obviously, but in general, we don't take it as a problem in itself, so I don't see why it's a problem when you apply it to writers. In particular, because as you see, if you like misconstrue the meanings of people around you that you directly interact with, you get into fights and misunderstandings. But you know, if it's a writer who has nothing to do with your life, it's even less harmful. So if you enjoy like making the fun out of it, then why not? Secondly, another way of approaching this is the claim that overanalyzing does not necessarily mean interpreting or misconstruing author intention. This idea has been proposed by Roland Barthes in his essay, The Death of the Author. He says that instead of trying to understand everything the text conveys to us through the lenses of author intention, we could just say that is what I, as the reader, get out of it. So people can analyze the meaning of a text without formulating it in terms of author intention. by adopting this approach, they're really recognizing the text as an evolving or interactive medium whose meaning and depth and just feelings or responses are individualized. In this framework, all sorts of interpretations and responses are equally valid as long as you have kind of sort of your own justifications for it. So maybe it is overanalyzing. It is not what the author intended, but it's valid because that's what the text is meant to provide you, this sort of open-ended interpretation. And now let's turn to another main concern of Shanspeare's video, which is the implications of being uncritical, and I wish to quote this part from her video.
We are living in a media-saturated world where it's easier than ever for our decisions to be made for us if we're so easily persuaded. Media literacy and critical thinking is something we hear about all the time online, particularly on Twitter, where that sort of thing often goes to die. We constantly tell our peers to read beyond headlines for information or learn to effectively communicate with their partners. Funnily enough, English studies train students in these areas. Therefore, it's no coincidence that an entire generation that's incapable of critically and empathetically engaging with the media are so adamant against English studies, literary criticism, and nuance. According to Gretchen Swartz, media literacy is defined as, quote, the ability of a citizen to access, analyze, evaluate, and produce information for specific outcomes, end quote.
So what are my comments on this part? Well, firstly, I wish to note that she mentions the art of the rhetoric a bit back in her video, which is basically the skills of persuasion, to put it very simply. It's been a significant part of education since ancient Greece. I think that analysing fiction allows us to identify all the skills that writers use in order to persuade us of certain ideas or evoke certain affectionate responses in us. So in a sense, they are engaging with the skills of the rhetoric. By understanding how these rhetorical skills are employed, and of course literary analysis is an excellent way of doing so, we are able to build up what Shanspeare just said is called media literacy. It means you're able to critically evaluate the information dispensed to us before making a judgment about whether it's true or not, or whether it's a good stance or not, and whether you would act upon any of the information you were given. And moreover, by learning media literacy and the skills of the rhetoric, you can employ these in your daily life, and I think that is just a very good skill for an informed citizen. In the second part, I wish to make a few comments on why we ought to read, analyze, and enjoy literary works. So there's an article called This is the Way Humanities End by Brian Rosenberg. He writes that from literature, we can see things of meaning and importance that we miss in the world around us, and for a time to experience that world from a perspective other than our own. Moreover, Roosevelt Montaz, the director for the Center of Core Curriculum at Columbia University, believes that engaging with important and complex texts can expose us to ideas to which we do not typically pay attention in daily life, that those texts can inspire personal growth and transformation, and that the humanities constitute an approach to the world that is in many ways obstinately unscientific. This leads not to a belief in one's wisdom or virtue, but to questions like the following. To what extent do my material advantages, my professional accomplishment, my social privileges depend on the exploitation, marginalization, and exclusion of others? To what degree do I live a compromised life? This seems much closer to a sense of humility than a sense of superiority. I wish to dissect this quote into two further points of analysis. Firstly, it highlights the crucial role that literature plays in exposing us to ideas and experiences that we typically neglect in everyday life. This, as Rosenberg acknowledges in his article, is closely related to the idea of defamiliarization, which the Russian formalists in particular saw as the point of literature and maybe art in general. So defamiliarization is defined as the belief that art can make the familiar strange and thereby allow us to see and understand the quotidian world in new and deeper ways. For example, Viktor Shklovsky discusses defamiliarization in his essay Art as Device, noting that art allows us to return to the sensation of life, to create the sensation of seeing and not merely recognizing things. The device of art is the estrangement of things and the complication of the form, with the explicit purpose of de-automatizing perception. So secondly, in the quote, Montaz has given examples of a series of questions that we consider when we read literature, and he believes that a consideration of these questions is sort of like capable of instilling humility in us. I agree with him on this point here, and I will expand my reasoning a bit here. In high school, we had this comparative text module where we compared Jane Eyre and a manifestation of it written by Jean Rhys called White Sargasso Sea. One of the key discussions that we had in class was how this post-colonial text by Rhys exposes the silencing and subjugation of the colonial subject in Bronte's original work. So the interesting is that this perspective or message is clearly not a central concern of the original text. Its manifestation in the text written by Bronte seems more like an accidental byproduct of whatever, imperialistic views that she just happened to hold as a white middle-class woman in England, in the Victorian century. By examining a lot of seemingly insignificant details in the book, which would be far from obvious to the reader who were not, brought to notice this on purpose, we are able to critically assess the implications of the colonialist perspective as subconsciously embedded in the book. And we could, learn from it. So what I wish to say from this example is that rigorous literary analysis provokes us to think, with humility and often self-reflective attitudes, about certain issues that are somewhat problematic, but in our daily lives they do pass sort of under the blanket because the situation has always been taken for granted, even if it's not exactly a fair situation. A few weeks ago, I went to a discussion group at Cambridge, and the topic of that week was called Making Sense. It discusses what it means for us to say instinctively of a statement or line of reasoning that it makes sense. So basically in life we often encounter arguments or opinions which we would hold an immediate attitude towards. Either that it makes sense or it's nonsense. Judging whether something makes sense is, well, if you're a reasonable human being and not a bigot, then it's completely unrelated to whether you agree with it or not. So the question becomes, what determines this immediate, almost unreflective response to things that others assert? So clearly we know that a lot of grounds for this reaction comes from our everyday experience and common sense. So if someone say that pigs can fly, I would of course say that's nonsense. But if someone said, oh, the pig escaped from the pigsty because I forgot to fix the fences, I'll be like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, and will probably just believe it even though I've never witnessed the scene. The discussion group speaker mentioned a point that is another large part of our intuition in this area has been cultivated via education. And I stress here, it is humanities education in particular which cultivates this. Suppose we have a very rich person and he buys a very rundown property. Our first intuition would be to think there's no way that he's buying it so that he could live and enjoy living in that property, right? So we start thinking alternative reasons for his decision. Maybe he likes the location, or the house has a sort of emotional meaning to him. Maybe he wishes to refurbish it for other purposes or rent it out. What many suppose is an intuitive ability that we hold for reasoning and making sense of things to decide whether a situation makes sense or not, or reconstruct situations so that they make sense to us. It's actually not that intuitive. Rather, it is largely a product of the humanities education. So for example, if I hear testimony that someone has flown through the air for 10 meters, I would immediately question its truthfulness and perhaps consider whether there are other mechanisms such as propellers or parachutes present in that situation which could produce such a result. By contrast, someone who's lived in some close-off mythical community that believed in magic would immediately believe it, because in their worldview it makes a lot of sense, but it makes no sense in mine. So the point I wish to make with this is to show how our education decides what makes sense to us. Precisely how does the humanities teach us what makes sense? Firstly, I wish to make a disclaimer that by this statement, I'm not saying that the sciences don't play any part in doing this. Of course, knowing a lot of scientific facts does to a large extent help you decide what makes sense. But what the humanities does is educate us in the feelings and desires that motivate human action, and how to construct a logically sound or reasonable argument, and much more. So without this sort of education, we won't be able to say, critically assess whether someone publishing a defamatory article of another is just merely wishing to express those views or have some ulterior motive. And this sort of assessment helps us form a reasoned judgment regarding the facts in the article. And this is also, of course, a sort of media literacy, which is important, as emphasized in Shanspeare's video. Another example directly relating to literature and how it teaches you, how to make sense of stuff, is reading multiple perspectives of literary characters can really enhance your sensitivity to the existence of multiple perspectives in life. And this ability and this knowledge or skill or awareness can help you make sense of a lot of complex situations and, deal with miscommunications and just understand other people better and adopt better interpersonal skills. So in conclusion, even though this video has gone over like a huge range of topics, in summary, I just wish to highlight a few core points in my message. Firstly, critical thinking is a skill that is so important for any informed, responsible citizen. Secondly, critical analysis of text is an excellent way of honing the skill. Thirdly, because of those two premises, 1 and 2, we should not take literary analysis as superfluous. And fourthly, a similar message can be applied to a lot of other humanities subjects. Thank you for watching this video. I'm very interested to hear you share some of your opinions on this video and this topic discussed in general. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed my video.